Madam Clerk, please tell me when we're ready to go.
We all set.
All set? Okay. Good evening. I'm Providence Councilwoman Joanne Ryan, calling the Committee on Finance regular meeting to order. It is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. It is just 5:30 on the nose. Madam Clerk, could you kindly read the roll?
Chairwoman Ryan,
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Castillo,
Present.
Councilwoman Narducci,
Here.
Councilwoman Anthony, absent. Councilman Taylor, absent. And we have three, we do have a quorum.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, could you kindly read item 1 into the record?
An ordinance establishing a tax stabilization agreement by and between the City of Providence, a Rhode Island municipal corporation, City and 8 Hewitt Street LLC, Hewitt Street.
Okay, this matter is before us today solely to schedule a public hearing. So with that, Madam Vice Chair, would you kindly make a motion to schedule a public hearing?
So moved.
Motion made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Senior Leader Narducci. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Okay, so we're all set on that one. On matter items 2, 3, and 4, I'd like to entertain a motion to bundle these three together.
So moved.
Motion made to bundle 2, 3, and 4 by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Senior Leader Narducci. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Sorry, I wanted to waive the reading of these items. Can you just amend your motion, Vice Chair, to waive the readings as well and bundle? Motion made to withdraw the original and make a motion to waive reading and bundle 2, 3, and 4, made by Vice Chair, seconded by Council Senior Leader Narducci. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, so we don't need to read these items into the record. These are a request for waiver of the disability, and there are 3 items. Who do we have present? Oh, let the record reflect. We have Councilman Taylor has joined this event. Okay, so who do we have to present on 2, 3, and 4?
Madam Chair, we have Sue Brophy.
Okay, please, why don't you join us at the table? Is there anyone else? Anyone else?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
the HI director is in queue to be let in,
Oh, good.
and he'll provide some testimony, I
Background.
believe.
Perfect. Okay. Do you want to have a seat?
Sure.
Okay, what we're going to do. Hello, Emmanuel.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon,
Wonderful.
Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, let the record reflect on, Madam Clerk, that we also are joined by Councilwoman Anthony. Okay, thank you. All right, let's swear everybody in on 2, 3, and 4, please, that is going to testify. So I think it's Emmanuel and these folks here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your names for the record.
Susan Brophy.
Stephen Smith.
Area.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so these items have come before us in the past. We are not voting on the merits of the disability claim. This is simply the fact that 18 months has passed, and this is essentially before us to waive the request to allow the matter to be heard. Is that correct, Solicitor?
That is correct. This is just the opportunity for the applicants or the participants who are here, the ability to provide an application to retirement. It's a separate process, 3 independent medical evaluators, as well as the retirement board, medical subcommittee. So this would be allowing the application to proceed.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Solicitor Chiaverini. At this point, I'd like to ask our Director of Human Resources, Emmanuel Echevarria, if you can weigh in, because last time we were together, we had a number of these disabilities. And this committee basically pondered why this was happening and felt as though, we had built some internal controls so that this wasn't happening regularly. I recognize we have a couple more that we, need to deal with this evening, but we wanted to hear from you to try to figure out what's going on. So please let us know. Please share with us.
Yeah, I have a couple of colleagues, I believe, that are also in the waiting area that can elaborate further in case I leave anything out. But essentially, we have a governing policy that dictates notification when somebody goes out on injury or work-related injury processes, where we notify them a year after their date of injury, and then again at the 15-month point. At the 15-month point, yes, and at the 17-month point after their injury, letting them know that at 18 months of work-related injury, they are able to apply for disability retirement. There's some nuance to this process. If an employee returns to work at any point, their time starts over again, and that may be part of the reason why some of these applications are coming to the council erroneously. I know when COVID was happening and we had some short staff issues where we were not sending out communications. I believe 4 or 5 slipped through the cracks. So we made sure that we checked our internal processes. We've notified everybody who was not notified in 2020 that their time had passed. I don't want to comment on the cases individually because, as you said, it's not about the merit, but some of these folks have received notification. Some of these are actually long-term folks who've been out on work-related injury that did receive notification. We have certification that they received the notification as well. So I'm not sure if some of the applications, one in particular, is an individual applying out of an abundance of abundance of caution, or if it's perhaps they don't know that they received a letter in the mail.
Okay, so notice here is key, that's what I'm hearing, and
Yes.
you apparently are telling us you have a process wherein you send out notice. Who are you noticing?
We notice the actual individual who's on work-related injury. After reviewing some of these situations, we're also building into our process notifying their attorneys as well. So that way we have dual notification procedures, and we're going to start sending these out certified mail. We used to send them attached to the checks because they were physical workers' compensation checks, but we recently went digital with most of our payments. So that option is now not on the table, which means we have an increased responsibility to make sure that we're actually noticing the individuals.
Okay, do you notice the union rep as well?
Yes. No, we do not notice a union representative because this is handled by outside counsel typically.
Okay.
I can speak to the union, and if it's appropriate and they would like to be noticed, I'm glad to notice them as well.
Okay, all right, and your testimony was that during COVID, some of the communications lapsed, which is probably the reason why we had a flurry of these come before the committee in recent months.
Yes, and I've been in touch with the internal auditor.
Okay.
And also we were looking at the recent folks that had applied, and I was reconciling with her what the situation was and giving her kind of a debrief on whether people's dates had shifted or if they were actually noticed. There was one individual in particular who was noticed 5 years ago, but he may have forgotten that he was eligible and then decided to apply for the waiver.
Understandably, after 5 years. Thank you very much. Committee members, any questions, concerns, thoughts on that? Okay. So we have with us this evening one of the petitioners in this matter, and we have the union rep, Steve Smith. So I will leave it up to you. Do you want to speak for the petitioner, or can you explain what happened in these 3 instances? Maybe I'll start with you and then have Ms. Brophy fill in any issues.
And Ms. Brophy can, these situations are usually very similar individuals are trying their best to come back, want to come back, and don't want to give up their position with the city. So, not to get into the details,
Yeah.
but therapy, surgeries, etc. And as far as I know, I talked to Ms. Brophy, she hadn't received notice. I think it'd probably be beneficial if the union did have notice in order to get it, to keep it communicated.
To help the process,
Yeah.
yeah?
And maybe this might be something the council would like to take up in terms of to review the process as a whole. What's working, what's not. And maybe have some conversations prior to the 18 months. If someone is very close to maybe being able to return or try to return at, say, 16 months and it needs a few more, we could probably request an extension even prior to the 18 months, but we'd have to notice that. I don't believe you received.
No, I didn't, not ready for.
Okay, so your testimony is that you didn't receive notice?
Yes.
Okay, and your testimony is for the other two folks that are not here?
I'm gonna check right now to see if they're waiting in the wings. If that's okay, Madam Chair.
Okay. Where,
And a point of clarification.
please, why don't you see if they're out there so we don't detain too much? Can you just hold just a second?
Yeah,
We're just
sure.
gonna stand at ease just a second to allow them to come back into the room. There's a lot going on out there. And then you stop. Wonderful.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Oh, yeah. Okay, wonderful. Please join us.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, before we start up again, Madam Clerk, could you please swear these two gentlemen in who are topics of items 2, 3, and 4 combined? Gentlemen, we're just going to swear you in.
And raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
John Go ahead, John Panels.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, so you were not with us when we started these items. Just to bring you up to speed, this isn't about the merits of your case. 18 months have passed. That's the ordinance on the books. This is solely before this committee to discern whether we should grant the waiver to your disability request so that you can go forward in the process and be heard. We've heard testimony that one of the petitioners did not receive appropriate notice. We heard testimony from the HR director that there was a lapse in communications during COVID. And we had testimony from the union rep that they did not receive notification. So this committee would like to know if you received notification of the timeline expressed in this waiver request, that you had 18 months.
Oh, not initially, well after that, yeah, not initially, no.
You didn't get it initially. How about you? Did you get any notification?
Any notification.
You don't? Okay. All right. You were going to weigh in before
I was
Mr.
going
Smith?
to make one suggested edit, if the committee's going to consider this. It looks on all three, it cites the improper subsection on the disability waiver.
Okay.
And a few years ago, Municode changed it from numbers to letters. So the correct citation would be section 17-189F subsection.
Okay. Not 6.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's F.
Well, let's, thank you very much, Mr. Eagle Eye Solicitor. Let's go ahead and correct that right away. So, Vice Chair, may I have a motion to amend items 2, 3, and 4, striking the number 6 after the section and replacing it with the letter F? May I have that
So
motion?
moved.
Motion made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Senior Leader Narducci. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. So these 2, 3, and 4 are amended per the direction from our solicitor. Okay, so with that, is there further testimony on this matter? Okay, Emmanuel, I think we do want to review this process. We recognize there's some bumps in notification. We're not gonna stand in the way of these folks moving forward with their claims. Again, this is not about the merits of their case. So with that, may I have a motion to recommend approval of items 2, 3, and 4 as amended? Motion made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Councilman, Majority Leader Taylor. I was struggling with the leader. Majority Leader Taylor, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Okay, these items are approved. We're recommending approval. It'll go to the full council for a vote. And again, this isn't about your individual case, it just gives you the opportunity to move forward. We wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service to the
Thank
city.
you all, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, so that brings us to item 5.
Careful.
Madam Clerk, would you kindly read item 5 into the record?
Communication from Lawrence
Thank you very much.
J.
Bye, Steve.
Nancy, Chief Financial Officer, and Sarah Rivera, Finance Director, dated January 14, 2022, submitting the report on review and assessment of payment in lieu of taxes pilot agreements.
Wonderful. Okay, who do we have? We have Chief Mancini.
Myself, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and I'm joined by the Finance Director, Ms. Silveria. She's on Zoom.
Wonderful. And Ms. Silveria, you are on mute, so can you unmute yourself? Perfect. Okay, Madam Clerk, help me, let's swear him in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
Lawrence J. Mancini, Chief Financial Officer of the City of Providence.
Wonderful.
Sarah Silveria.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I interrupted you, Ms. Silveria, I apologize. Okay, so anyone else testifying this, or is it just?
No, I'll be
okay.
the finance team, myself and
Okay.
Ms. Silveria.
All right, so this is a report dated January 14, 2022, payment in lieu of taxes. And it is a summary report. Could you kindly present this to the committee?
I will. So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This report, as the record reflects, was in response to a resolution number 213, which was approved by this council on May 6, 2021, and it became effective May 17, 2021. The report was worked on by both the finance team and the policy team in the mayor's office in conjunction with the city assessor. And we spent a fair amount of time through the course of the summer and right through the end of the calendar year preparing the report in time to file it with the city council. As you may know, this information is also the subject of a Senate Special Committee or Commission that's studying taxes and properties. With that said, I gave similar testimony on March 14th, that commission, and provided them with this copy of this report, and I addressed the report in summary fashion. If it pleases the committee, Madam Chair, members of the committee, this evening, I won't read the entire report into the record, but I would like to go through the highlights of it for the benefit of the committee, and I will take any questions, as will Ms. Silveria, who was my co-author of this report from the finance team.
Please.
Thank you. So as all of you know, the city of Providence hosts a number of large and medium-sized tax-exempt organizations, small and small-sized nonprofits. In fact, the city, the total land area that nonprofits consume is approximately 39% of the city's all parcels. Of that 39%, approximately 28% are owned by the largest nonprofit institutions in the city. Under the federal law known as 501c3, a nonprofit status exemption is provided to all of these institutions, exempting them from any real estate taxes. Having said that, Madam Chair, we have for many years been in agreement under the local level with many of the tax exempt institutions that started over the period from 2002 to the current time. You're going to hear later in testimony, and already has been provided, that these agreements will now be coming to their end. The second set of these agreements were voluntary, and they run through June 30, 2022 this year, and the last of them will expire next year. The administration has endeavored to continue discussions and negotiations with the local pilots, in addition to the pilot revenue that's received under the state's pilot law. Under that law, any host community is entitled to and eligible to receive reimbursement from the state. They're also known as payment in lieu of taxes for the amount of revenue that the state will appropriate as a reimbursement. While I might jump ahead a little bit, I wanted to put on record the fact that even with that pilot payment from the state, which today approximates 34 million, the way the formula works is Providence has close to $3.6 billion in land and land area value associated with all of the tax exempt institutions in the city. At the current commercial tax rate of $36.70 per thousand, if we were collecting taxes at the commercial rate, if they were not tax exempt, we would be entitled to close to $131 million in tax revenue, vis-a-vis the 34 million that we receive today from the state, and of course about 7 million local. We're leaving approximately 90 million in uncollected or unrecognized revenue. Certainly a significant impact to a city like Providence, the capital city. This executive summary report continues to say that the Alonzo administration in 2018 established what was known as the Urban Innovation Partnership. It was a body that was meant to foster collaboration in a way that would leverage the core strengths of each of these institutions along with the city's activities. It's in all of Providence's best interest to work together and collaboratively with the large nonprofits and to ratify updated pilot agreements using best practices identified by researchers, including in other cities. Namely, the city seeks to establish a stable, transparent process by which all stakeholders are clear and accountable to the terms of the agreements. The ultimate goal of these agreements is to ensure fair contributions and partnerships with large nonprofit institutions, and additionally add stability for the city's fiscal future. And then finally, this report has been compiled as a means to inform the public of the current state of city finances, the current state of pilot agreements, recommended best practices for future agreements, and the city's goals for collaborating with the largest nonprofits moving forward. As I move through the report, members of the committee, on page 2, it does give the current state of Providence's finances. We've given testimony in this forum here before this committee on many occasions. Likewise, we've given testimony to the General Assembly and other public bodies. This is information that is readily available and has been shared in committee. It talks about the city's current stability over the past decade, and credit to both the mayoral and council administrations in partnership and collaboration with in approving and adopting stable and balanced budgets, along with stabilized tax levies and tax expansion. It goes on to talk about the city's tax system. Currently, the tax system generates $343 million in tax revenue, representing nearly 68% of the city budget. This is an annual exercise, as you all know. It's consistent with the budget process, and it's associated with the city's tax properties. On page 3, we talk about the last several years' history of the tax levy, abatements, the levy, and you'll see that to the far right corner, we look at the percentage of tax collection at the end of the year. It's in the mid to the upper 90s. It's an excellent percentage associated with the capital city. Our collection rate, while we budget at 93.5% to 94%, the collection of the city's taxes is under outstanding terms and conditions by both the city collector and the city assessor's office, exercising every one of our opportunities to stabilize tax and tax collections, notwithstanding the taxes that we do not assess, as in the case of nonprofits. The city's tax expansion is between 1% and 2% a year under natural growth, without raising tax rates. We have not had a tax rate change in the city in nearly 7 years. It's based on the natural expansion of the tax roll, which includes new property additions, permits, and during the period of revaluation. The city has, in fact, limited its means to generate additional revenue by fees which are set by state law, and we're not able to achieve those state law fees. As you all know, under any given year, the city is governed by the state provision of 44-5-2, which limits the expansion of the city's tax roll to no greater than 4%, as it applies to all municipalities of the state of Rhode. We have always worked within that range year over year. On page 4, we talk about state aid. You heard me say earlier, our percentage of state aid. You'll see in the middle of the page, from the years 2017 to 2021, the range of dollars that the city receives, running between 33 million and currently 34 million. And this is based on a formula that can be as high as 27%. The law does provide a range between 22 and 27. So in any given year, if the General Assembly is not able to accommodate that reimbursement, it could suffer a reduction in revenue. We've been fortunate and blessed that over the last several years, the General Assembly has appropriated sufficient funds to continue at 27%, and we use that 34 million. I might digress for a moment. It's that same 34 million that at year end, each year in the budget, we rely upon that when it arrives in July, and that assists us with liquidating the final portion of the city's general fund pension obligation. And I will say, for the record, Madam Chairman of the committee, that unusual and somewhat unique tax is based upon that some 30 years ago, when the state was going through its own fiscal troubles, it asked Providence and several other communities, would we wait for our money? And therefore, would we wait through the so-called accounting change, which basically says it's your money for the current year, but you won't get it until the future year. So that process, in effect, when we apply the 60-day rule and we apply it to the prior year, in effect, with that last portion of the pilot money, we do in fact meet our entire pension obligation in the current year under that particular arrangement. At the bottom of page 4, you read about the comparisons to other cities. This is particularly interesting because you'll see other cities and what percentage of their tax base is considered exempt from taxes. It lists Boston at 24%, Brockton and New Bedford at 12 and 17 respectively, Springfield 19 and Worcester 27%. These are their percentages of their properties that are exempt from taxation. We talked about the fact that 39.3% of Providence's property is tax exempt. Before you on page 5 is the schedule of properties by the largest institutions. In fact, all are displayed there, between the universities and the hospitals, and it shows what their current assessment is, what the true tax would be if we were paying tax at the commercial rate, and what portion of the state pilot is affiliated with them. As I provided you earlier, I indicated that it should actually be noted that Providence's commercial tax levy is nearly identical to the amount of levy that we do not collect from nonprofits. And I say that not to draw more attention to the notion that we don't collect them, but from a statistical standpoint, our levy is broken down by residential, commercial, and personal property. It's staggering to note that the amount that is not collected or assessed is nearly equal to the commercial tax levy in the city currently. Page 6 talks about the City Council Commission to study taxes and properties during 2010. And that commission did a great job. They identified the issues, same issues that we talked about today. It was led then by the then and now the late former chair, Michael Van Leesten, and it had members of that included Representative today, Camila Bella Wilkinson, she's a member of the House Finance Committee, and several other members of that committee, and they studied the same issue. And they arrived at 5 compelling points. Apportion lease costs to major tax institutions like land area, and they felt that all non-public lands yield the city service costs estimated between $28.4 million and $29 million. They made some recommendations. That commission made recommendations 1 through 5. Create the Capital City Partnership for Economic Growth. This was developed a low-resource and staff partnership to dedicate growing taxable business based in Providence, increasing economic opportunities, and continue existing and expand efforts to yield municipal savings and cost avoidance. Number 2, give the city of Providence a share of the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy at that point was identified to actively encourage the expansion of higher education, healthcare, and research. The city of Providence needs to directly capture some of the economic benefits in the form of general revenue. Recommendation number 3, achieve full funding of the state pilot for the city of Providence. I'm pleased to say that we have, in fact, seen this in the past 5 years, credit to the city's delegation to the General Assembly and the General Assembly in its own right, and continue to fund it at full 27%. Item 4, use memorandums of understanding to build trust, stability, and predictability. And then finally, number 5, maximize the future revenue stream from the Interstate 195 parcels by seeking taxable developments under an MOU, or developments with revenue shared to the state. Those were their recommendations in 2010. As I move to page 7, providing you with a comparison of other cities' pilot agreements, the one that stands out most significantly and was recently entered into just prior to this report being issued was the newly adopted agreement between the city of New Haven as host city to Yale University. A significantly large lump sum payment and an annual payment that will support that local economy in the New Haven area that abounds the university. So this was presented to you to show you that their population rank and the revenue that's generated by these agreements between the university and the host city. The bottom of page 7 talks about reporting and accountability, and we aspire to do exactly as we have regularly. We maintain the ability to track and monitor our payments under the local pilot program. Our assessor's office maintains a database that includes all of the parcels associated with any of the institutions, be it hospitals or educational facilities. Page 8 talks about the structure of the agreements. These are agreements that modeled after Harvard University and Cambridge, and they talked about how those agreements came into existence, and then it talks about recommended best practices. The well-noted Lincoln Institute of Land Policy published a report that provided detailed examination of pilot programs across the country, including our own very capital city. Among other things, the report provides best practice recommendations on building support for local pilot programs, the features of those programs, strategies for obtaining pilot agreements, and alternatives to pilots. The report highlights that pilot agreements should be built collaboratively with anchor institutions, particularly in municipalities in which the principal source of revenue is property taxes. And that points directly to the city of Providence, because that's what I had said earlier, 68% of the city's budgeted revenue general fund comes from property taxes. In addition to pilot agreements, the report recommends identifying alternative revenue sources like service contributions or user fees. The policy team projected a report that included the impact expansion on nonprofits on Providence communities. In March of 2021, the city unveiled the completion of a report known as the Matter of Truth, and it talked about the dislocation, relocation of communities of color and communities of underserved individuals during the past half century, and it talked about those land areas being absorbed and or acquired by nonprofits, and it cites specifically Brown University and other institutions. That appears on page 9. Page 10, the articulation of the stated goals. It was thought from the beginning of this report that there should be at least those goals that would be presented on the basis of any future expansion or future continuation agreements, and they were thought of in terms of best interest of the city and best interest of the institutions. To increase and further strengthen the fiscal stability of the city's future and increase transparency and collaboration with the large nonprofit organizations, the city seeks pilot agreements that will cover 4 areas. Number 1, have clearly articulated standardized formulas to determine contributions that an institution will make. Today, those contributions were negotiated, in many cases, independent of one another and on the basis of separate considerations. So this would stabilize to a standard formula. Item 2, provide opportunity to adjust yearly pilot contributions based on services provided by the city, to the city by the institution. You will hear, or probably have read, and properly so, the institutions have indicated that their worth to the city needs to be measured as well. And while we recognize that, the city still continues to say that there are services that we would provide to every citizen, corporate included, but the expansion of the city's tax roll is highly dependent upon the nonprofit revenue that we do not see today. Item 3, provide opportunity to adjust yearly pilot contributions based on the acquisition or relinquishment of new property by exempt institutions. Today, that process is known as transition parcel revenue. When a nonprofit acquires properties through a transition parcel acquisition, it phases out or phases down the full value of the property over a period that's as long as 15 years. And so while we still collect, once that period expires, it becomes fully tax exempt. So we've seen some of that revenue, and sometimes it could be misleading because it's already incorporated in the last several years, but as the years pass, we will not see that revenue and that value. And then finally, item 4 says are multi-year agreements that provide predictability and stability of pilots. And I think as anyone here on this committee that deals with the budget and the city's finances will attest to, that the backbone of every good measure of city government as it comes to the city's finances is predictability and stability. You can't build a budget this year or next year without knowing where our revenues are and how stable they are and how predictable they are. So the same would hold true with any new agreements that we would enter into, and that should be one of the cornerstones of that. So that completes the report as presented. I'm happy to take questions, and I'm happy to provide any further testimony at this time.
Committee members, Councilwoman Anthony.
Thank you so much for all of your work on this. I'd like to know where we are with our current negotiations on the pilots.
So the administration sent out the requisite letters to inform the institutions that we are aware that those agreements are coming to or drawing near to their end, either this June, literally, or next year. And we've asked that they consider renegotiations. We have this date not had a acceptance of that notice as of yet.
So what is happening with the collaborative?
I'm sorry?
Is there a collaborative that's meeting that was referenced on earlier in the document? I mean, is
No,
there a
that-
collaborative group that's meeting to discuss how we're moving forward with the pilot?
The group that completed this report was internal to the city. It was the finance team and the city policy team. Our policy chief, Diane Perdomo, acts as the liaison to that community and certainly could address that in greater detail than I could, but we did send, as a matter of policy, the letters informing the institutions that the current agreements will be expiring, and we were encouraging and seeking the ability to negotiate and engage in best practices.
And if they don't respond and it expires, then that's it?
So if it don't respond and expires, then it would be incumbent upon, I presume, the next mayor or the next council administration to once again begin that process, hopefully in time to have that included in the next budget, not the 2023 budget.
And what kind of hole, let me just ask you this, I know you said some of them expire in this June of 22, some of June of 23. What kind of hole in our budget are we gonna have if these expire in June 22 without renewing pilots?
So the current revenue from all pilots in 2022 totals 6.4 million. It'll drop to 2.4 million in 2023.
Thank you.
Please repeat that again, please.
The current revenue
Yeah.
of all pilot agreements
Yeah.
in the 2022 budget totals 6.4 million. That will drop to 2.4 million, subject to any further negotiations in the 2023 budget.
Okey-dokey. Yes, Senior Leader Narducci, please.
The pilot program, I've been fighting for 16 years. It's absolutely ridiculous what it does to our city. The percentage of untaxable property in our city has grown significantly in the last 10 years. What always bothered me was, what I always said, what always fell on deaf ears was, if we could hit the organization with a percentage, that they have to pay a percentage, like, and I'm just gonna use a number. And I'll grab Brown University because they're the first one for here. If we could get 4% taxes, forget the pilot programs, 4% tax from Brown University, our city would be in great shape, but that's just one. The pilot program, it's, again, stop me if I'm wrong, the pilot program is an agreed upon tax. And I don't think I'm wrong this time, I'll go to RISD. RISD tomorrow can say, we're not paying. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It's-
For all those institutions, Mr. Leader, who have signed, who entered into voluntary agreements, they could in fact suspend or cancel those agreements.
But yet, Mary Smith, that is living on a fixed income, cannot turn around tomorrow and say, I'm not paying my taxes,
That's correct.
or she loses her property.
That's correct.
You talked about the neighborhoods that were hurt by the growth of these nonprofits.
Yes.
Growing up, going to neighborhood boys clubs and stuff, I can remember going down to where Rhode Island Hospital is, and there was numerous 6-unit houses, 3 tenement houses. I think Rhode Island Hospital knocked out 4 neighborhoods. Not 1, not 2, but 4 neighborhoods. And again, a lot of those houses were 3 tenement, 6 units. Brown University is doing the same thing. And you look and you see the development that's going on down on Eddy Street and that whole general area over near the I-95 property. And it's all Brown University that we're not getting any taxes from. the agreed upon taxes, bro. I just don't see why, and I'm talking to our future colleagues. You guys gotta do something with this particular program because from what I see, we're showing a surplus this year in the budget. Only because of ARPA funding. We're not gonna have that 50 million next year. That we're ahead of the game now. If something's not done with these pilot programs moving forward, you guys are gonna have to go back to the homeowners and raise their taxes. Because we just don't have the funds coming in. You know, I mean, I could go off all night on the pilot program, but I won't. I just felt it important to express my concerns with it. I'm not going anywhere when my term's over because I love my city. I will continue to live on Dorothy Avenue. But we're in financial trouble in 2023. And if we don't do something with these programs, it's going to create more of a monster. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Taylor.
Quick question, I don't see Roger Williams Hospital on here, are they hooked in with someone else?
They're part of Charter Care, is Charter Care?
They're part of Miriam, maybe?
No, Charter Care, I think it's,
Rhode Island
Rhode
Hospital.
Island Hospital?
no,
Nobody-
There is a forfeit.
no. It's not, I'm sure. They're not known as Rogers, they're known as Charter Care, and I don't know if that's if their agreement is different than this.
They don't have an agreement, do they?
There was an agreement when that was first taken over, and it was mostly, under tangible, and it has been, it's not part of real estate.
Did they make their payment last year?
Yes, they did.
Also, I know you said you made testimony, I know I've been reading about the state. How does that affect us if the Senate or if the General Assembly comes up with a plan that they have to pay? Who makes that, them or we do?
So any enabling legislation, I would defer to council on this, but I think my guidance would be that any enabling legislation that the General Assembly would adopt that would empower local municipalities to exercise under that authority would have to be viewed later once we know what it is. But I think that my instincts is that the commission was formed because capital city and other cities have demonstrated year over year that it's getting more difficult to balance our budgets. And I gave this testimony also, Councilman, because it's important to know the state pilot funding formula is predicated on a set dollar appropriation. We'll use 40 million, I believe, as the example. The truth is, the pilot reimbursement, if the formula was held strictly under the 27%, it goes from 22 to 27%. If that 27% on the $3.6 billion of property valuation, we would be getting more like 36 million, not 34 million. And while it may not solve the crisis, as I told in your testimony, it's still 2 million different than what it ought to be. And the reason for that is because there's not enough funding in the original pilot appropriation to accommodate every host community for their pilot loss. So on a pro rata reduction, we're probably getting 2 million less than we should be getting. Maybe we're getting 97% of what we should be getting, but not quite the full amount. That's not meant to poke legislators by saying that, but I had to be clear about that. I did put that on record at the Senate committee, and I saw a lot of head that nodded in approval. So that's been in existence for some time, but if you multiply 2 million a year by the last 5 years, we lost $10 million. With due respect.
It adds up.
It adds up.
About every year we're losing anyway, because they don't fund it, they always knock off, say, 25%, whatever
Well,
percentage. Is this year,
I think it's in that process that I'm referring to, that you have to put the money in the appropriation in order to fully fund even the 27%. In our case, that would be 36 million, not 34.
are they gonna fund that this year, we don't know,
I think the purpose of this commission was to draw attention to the issue, critical as it may be.
just because
And I do
you hear
think-
they have $661 million that hopefully they would maybe fund it.
But I
They haven't
think,
funded
to
it.
Leader Narducci's point, which was my words exactly, regardless of the funding formula and how it's laid out, the impact is that some 90 million is uncollected in tax revenue associated with land value annually.
What gets me is that when you read in the paper that how much the Brown University endowment is worth compared to what they're paying for taxes, you know? It's kind of, and plus some of those they're using as housing and stores, so it's like, in my opinion, that's.
Non-mission
It shouldn't be, right?
Mm.
It should be.
Thank you.
Education.
Right.
Thank you, Councilman. Anyone else? Any? Councilwoman? Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Larry, for your efforts
Thank you.
with this report, as well as going up to the Hill and enlightening our state colleagues. This commission, this study happened in 2010. Are we gonna be doing another study? Should we be doing another study?
Well, I think the intent of the resolution was to get us to start thinking about what are alternatives, if there are alternatives to pilot funding, and if it's really expansion of the pilot funding process, then best practices need to be established, and those best practices need to be collaboratively agreed to. Once they can be agreed to, or whether they can be done even now in the remaining term of the current administration and council, or whether or not they will begin anew, I do think no matter who is leading that charge and that effort, that's the bottom line. There has to be an understanding of trust and reasonableness that it cannot continue under the current format. When that can happen, I think that we might see something that is more progressive in the way of a fair arrangement for all parties.
So I'm gonna look at that resolution and maybe think about reworking it and try to see if we can play a role in having more analysis done to come up with some collaborative approach at addressing this loss of 90 million that you stated. The other thing that I'm intrigued by is your comments relative to New Haven. What was the practice, what was the process that they went through? Obviously, there's a significant bump in their pilot. Talk about that, because to me, that's almost a best practice that we should be following.
So anecdotally, as I recall reading and following the steps that led to that, it was based on a true working partnership of the host community and the university community, one in sync, where it was a true shared mission that the university excelled because the community, the host community, welcomed it as part of that. The entire area surrounding the New Haven campus is a city within a city, and it lives and breathes because of the University. It's not detached from that. And it started, first and foremost, it started with them providing voluntary improvements to the area before they became a tax agreement. So significant piece of work, really being heralded throughout the country, that agreement. It's truly a good partnership. And I don't mean to impugn the reputation and integrity of this city's institutions. I don't mean to say that at all, but I do think questions asked by Madam Chair, by your members, are valid questions. What needs to be done? I think that's where it has to begin. I think everyone has to come to the table and understand that there needs to be more fairness in that.
So I am intrigued by New Haven, and I would like to delve into that as a best practice and see if we can somehow model that and have our discussions kind of mirror that, because I do think that that was a successful effort. The other question I had was relative to over time. You showed us 2017. As we go back to 2017, state aid, is that when it started? What happened prior to that?
No. State aid.
On page 4.
Page 4. No, the pilot program has been in existence, to my memory, at least 40 years, 4 decades or better. Relatively speaking, the formula has been modified over time, at least the last 12 years that I can speak to directly. It has been a sliding scale of a minimum no less than 22% to a maximum of 27%, predicated on the tax assessed value of every host community. Province values do not change because it's a tax institution. When the reval is done, while it's difficult to find a comparable property, and that testimony, that question was actually asked by Mr. Egan, who represents the universities in that Senate commission, that it's difficult to find a comparable property, but we go based on square footage, like use, et cetera, and that's what the reval will be. So as that has grown, as that has expanded over time, it becomes part of the formula in which the 22 to 27% is applied against. Bear in mind, we're talking today $3.6 billion, even at the 27% inclusion, at our commercial rate, it would have generated 131 million to the 34 million. Now, as the commercial rate would drop going forward, we've frozen the commercial rate in 8 years as a sign to the business community that we're still a friendly city. We'd love to have lowered it, but we froze it. As that rate can be lowered over time in the years of future, then that funding formula will change, because now your commercial rate of the amount that they would collect will not be as great, and therefore the reimbursement will be low. So one is tied together, but in the last decade, it has been in the 30 to 34 million. We've seen steadily at that spread of payments between 30 and 34 million.
Okay. All right, that answers my question. So I am going to look at the resolution that we put forth and see if we can make some modifications in it so that we can get a more robust analysis of what's happening at a city level. I think it's wonderful that the General Assembly is looking at it. We certainly did great work on page 6, this overview. There's some, and we've, made inroads on some of the components of it, but we need to do more. It's a serious drain on the finances of the city of Providence, and as our wonderful senior leader has expressed quite aptly, it's a big burden. It's only going to continue to grow for us to a point where it's out of control. We need to get our arms around it as we're focusing. I mean, we sat at this table and we talked about our short-term finances, and we did a wonderful job in getting them under control.
We sure did.
And we're certainly really good work. I remember as a freshman council person coming on board here in the finance committee and refinancing our bonds and making a lot of smart decisions that raised our bond rating to a point where it became possible for us to borrow at reasonable rates. So we've done good work on our short-term finances. It's great to see us focusing on our pension obligation bond. We always knew that was a big challenge for us. So I'm looking forward to also addressing this pilot issue, because that is another big issue. So with that, committee members?
May I just say one more thing?
Councilwoman Anthony.
Thank you. The thing that bothered me recently is River Place, I think it was, that was purchased by Brown. I think that's the name of the apartment complex. I was thrilled to see that, they had formed a for-profit corporate or company to purchase it, which meant it would be taxed, but then it was, they took it subject to a tax stabilization agreement. That just killed me. It seems to me to be loophole, should be fixed, because that didn't seem to be right either. So I just mentioned that.
Madam Chair, if I may just quickly.
Senior Leader Naducci?
Larry, you know that the pilot program has been a thought on our side for many, many years. And I always said, Brown University, if we just put a number on them, Rhode Island Hospital put a number on them, what are you gonna do? They ain't gonna get up and move. We have to at one point, like I said earlier, start thinking of the people that live here, from our neighborhoods, from our wards, and not these big organizations, nonprofit organizations that are making billions of dollars. And I guess the other question I would have, Larry, just quick, is because Chief had, Councilman Taylor had brought up a good point. Do we have anybody that makes sure that any of their properties that they're claiming, or any educational properties, that's all they are with these schools and universities?
So,
Because I know one of the buildings has a very popular restaurant in it. That's not educational. They're paying a very serious amount for rent.
Yeah.
Again,
so while that falls in the direction of the assessor's office, and I do know that the assessors, their field cards reflect any property that's owned by a tax exempt institution that has a commercial private use, basically public use, is not given the exemption. There is a tax bill that's associated with that to the party who's using that property. So, but as to having a dedicated staff person that would go out and check on it on a regular basis, I don't think the current budget could support that capacity, although there was some legislation that was thought of at one time that it was called non-mission critical, thinking that would be the elixir to this problem, but it won't be, because that would take a significant amount of personnel that would go out daily. That would be their only job, and I don't think they would find what people believe they were looking for. That won't be the solution. The solution, in my opinion, resides in the ability to sit and reason with this process, that we're the host community. We're the New Haven to Yale, that we are to Brown and Risley. And they're world-class institutions. By all means, I'm proud to have them in our city. They are world-class institutions. I would not want them
I
to.
don't think any of us arguing that point.
No, but I make my point being that it's difficult to strike a balance when you want to be fair with it, but by the same token, we have to be strict as well. But the truth is, is that bear in mind, they all enjoy 501c3 status, which is granted by federal taxation exemption, and some of them include General Assembly provisions and powers, and also land granting provisions that were done pre-colonial days. So with that said, we can talk about endowments and endowment balances, but it won't change the pictures associated with land value and how that land value cannot be taxed and cannot be according to revenues.
Thank you, members.
Thank you. All set, everybody? Well, thank you again for your presentation, your hard work on this topic. I think there's an appetite, obviously, to renegotiate some of these pilot agreements to see how we can get some more revenue out of them, these institutions. And I do like the New Haven model, so I particularly am going to be delving into that. And I would appreciate whatever thoughts that you have along the way. Okay, with that, I don't see any further item on our agenda for this evening. May I have a motion to adjourn? Motion made by Senior Leader Nanducci, seconded by Majority Leader Taylor. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. We're adjourned.
Someday I'll get you.
Thank you.